Fun is a band that I grew up with. I was about 5.5 when Some Nights released their second, final, and largest album, and I distinctly remember always thinking that was one of my favorite albums at the time. And that album kind of had like a big, bombastic, like pop sound to it that you specifically found a lot in the 2010s. But there were a lot of tracks on there that were able to be a little more experimental, and I think that ability of them to be more experimental really spoke to me and helped shape my music taste now. And so, as I got older, I started listening to Fun more and listening just to music more in general. Went back, found their first album, Aim and Ignite, and on that album, we get to see a lot more theatrical and experimental cuts on the record, and kind of got a sound that I feel worked really well for the combined styles of the three members. The album starts with Be Calm, which is a track characterized mostly just by it kind of being all over the place. And on this track, we're already introduced to a couple different common elements of Fun's music, first of which being they like to have this kind of weird dissonance between their lyrics and their instrumentals. A lot of their songs have pretty downer and depressing lyrics, but the instrumentals keep a kind of upbeat feeling throughout, and we see that a lot on both of their albums. And the other element they do a lot, more specifically, I think Nate Ruess liked to do it, was referencing past albums that were made. On this track, we see a callback to a old song written by Nate for the format, which we see in the line, "I can't remember the man, the panhandler, or his melody." And they like to do this a good amount. We saw it on Stars, which was the outro for Some Nights, and we saw it on Ruess's solo album, Grand Romantic. Moving on to track 2, we have Benson Hedges, and it's decent, but it just kind of leaves me feeling empty. There's a couple references to religion on there, which that's something that we also see pretty commonly with Ruess, especially on his solo cut, Grand Romantic again. And I really don't know what it is, but something on the track just feels like it's missing to me, but I'm not entirely sure what it was or what I would add, but something just feels like it's not there. Track 3 here is All the Pretty Girls, released as the second single for the album, and it feels the most like it was made to be a single. So, kind of an interesting thing with this song is you listen to it, it seems like kind of your generic pop love song, whatever. But if you look into it a little more, the lyrics are more about kind of trying to get over an ex, but not really being able to, and just kind of always defaulting back to, I can't love this new person because I'm not over the old person. And so that's still not like a crazy, outlandish, never done before concept, but I think they executed it pretty well here. Up fourth, we have I Want to Be the One, which is another love song. We got those back to back on here. This one, though, it's a little bit more in depth with the lyrics, and it's not just about love, but it's more about putting those kind of feelings into writing through a song. And they kind of tried to make this song a little more cutesy than the last one, obviously, but through the lyrics, writing, and the overall production on the song, they made it work pretty well. Track 5 was actually the lead single for the album and the band as a whole, and it's titled At Least I'm Not As Sad As I Used to Be. And listening to it at first, it seems like it's a weird choice for a lead single, especially for your first one ever as a band. But I feel like it was honestly a pretty good decision because it kind of cemented the sound we would expect more on this album. Takes a bit of a left turn towards the end. Most of the song's written in 4/4 time signature, and then they switch it to 3/4, strip down most of the instruments just to a piano, and then slowly bring them back in until all of a sudden we've got all these instruments going off at once, and just kind of an explosion of sound, but they were able to still kind of make it work. And on this track, we see a great example of something I haven't really talked about yet, which is Nate Ruess's vocal range. And when I say the man can sing, like it's crazy. He is. A lot of people don't like this kind of comparison, but I think he might be like a modern day Freddie Mercury. Honestly, just in terms of vocal range. And most of the albums he's on, we've seen him go incredibly high at least one time on the album on a note. And there hasn't been a single time where it hasn't sounded great. Going to track 6, we have Light a Roman Candle with Me, and this one's a little bit of a softer love song, and I like it, but there's not really a whole lot to say about it. One thing is, it did, and through the lyrics, give us the title for the album, Aim and Ignite, and that is one thing I personally always love about albums, is when the title is either comes from the lyrics from a song on the album, or they find a way to work it into one of the songs. We move on then to Walking the Dog, which is another kind of pop feeling track and is the third single from this album. This one does have a little bit more of an electronic feel to it, which we haven't like completely seen on the album up to this point, but it works pretty well. I do have a pretty big issue with this song, but I'll save that for a little bit later because it becomes more relevant towards the end of the album. So at number 8 we have Bar Lights, and this one I also really like. Instrumental here's got a lot of different layers going on, but it never really comes off as super overwhelming. There's some fun lyrics on this one, and I don't really have too much to say other than that, but this is a good one that I always like to come back to on this album. With that, we move to track 9, which is The Gambler, and this is honestly the whole reason I wanted to make this album review. This is my favorite song on the album. It's not even close. It's another love song, which we've seen a couple of already, but this one does something I really don't think I've ever seen another song do. It tells like the story of Nate Ruess's parents, but it specifically does it from the perspective of his parents. So the song starts off perspective of his father and everything, but about halfway through the track, it switches to the perspective of his mother. And it's kind of hard to explain without listening to the song, but you'll know when you hear it. And then only instruments on this one are just a piano and a couple string instruments throughout. But so it's easily the most stripped back instrumental on the whole album, but it was a good choice because it really helped Nate's voice kind of shine through, and the kind of stripped back feeling of it helps the song feel a lot more emotional than if it had a bunch of stuff going on like a lot of other tracks do. Now again, by far best song on Aim and Ignite. After that, we get to track 10, the closer, Take Your Time Coming Home, and this one clocks in about 8 minutes. This is kind of a pattern with Fun's outros, the whole 2 of them we got. Stars, the outro for Some Nights, was around 7 minutes. Thing with that was Stars never really felt like a 7-minute long track because it was always kind of throwing something new at you, and in doing that it kind of felt a lot shorter. Stars got a lot of flack for its production back in the day, mainly due to the heavy vocoding use on the track that a lot of people weren't a fan of. I personally liked it. I thought it was kind of a cool choice to do and kind of worked with the context of the song and the whole album and everything. But on this track, there's not really enough going on to warrant the length of the song. I think 6 minutes would have been plenty of time to get everything done, and even then, that would probably be more than required. But the track does work as a closer overall, but it's just that it's long. The instrumental doesn't really do anything too interesting. It's got a couple stripped back parts, but they're pretty predictable. And so, in doing that, it just kind of makes the track feel longer. So, like I said, it does a good job as an album closer, but it's really not worth the whole 8 minutes you have to listen to it. That's not all, though, because we have 5 whole bonus tracks on this album. Despite that, only one of them is an actual new track. The rest of them are just kind of remasters and remixes and stuff of other songs on the album. That only new song is Stitch Me Up, and it's okay. Instrumental on here is really cluttered, but it feels like it's just kind of being loud for the sake of being loud, and the lyrics aren't like crazy interesting. But it doesn't drag on as long as Take Your Time did, which is good. This one's only about 4 minutes. After that, we have Walking the Dog 2, and this is easily my favorite of the bonus tracks. It's a kind of cool concept. Basically, they took the original lyrics from Walking the Dog, re-recorded the vocals and everything, and switched up the instrumental. I think it's in a different, pretty sure it's in a different key now, and it's kind of a cool testament to how you're able to keep the same lyrics on a song, but just by changing the instrumental or the vocal inflection or just any little thing like that, you can completely just change how a song feels. Track 13, we have an acoustic version of Take Your Time, and it's fine. It still feels too long, even though it's only half the length of the original. And then we have the 2 RAC mixes on the album. And right here, we have my biggest problem with Aim and Ignite. So the last track on the album, I'll go there first, is the RAC mix for All the Pretty Girls, and it's fine. Again, it feels different enough from the original to kind of be warranted. And then we have track 14, the Walking the Dog RAC mix. This song genuinely makes me mad, because we had Walking the Dog, and we had Walking the Dog 2, which switched everything up, and it worked, because it was a cool alternate version. Then we had the RAC mix. Barely feels any different from the original Walking the Dog, and it just makes me question why. Obviously, RAC can do whatever he wants, and it's nice that he was able to get some remixes on the album, but I'm just thinking, he could have done any other track on this album. Like Benson Hedges or Bar Lights could have been so much better to get RAC mixes, and then he just basically just remasters Walking the Dog, and it feels no different and just like a waste of a track. And there you have it. Aim and Ignite is a pretty decent album, especially considering it was Fun's first album, but a lot of the tracks really just don't do that much to hold my interest in the end. But the highs on this album, which tracks 1, 5, 8, and 9, they're pretty good, especially, again, The Gambler, track 9. Just those 4 tracks really make the album for me, and I feel like if this was just a 4-track EP that just had Be Calm, At Least I'm Not As Sad, Bar Lights, and The Gambler, that would be one of my favorite EPs if it just had those 4 tracks. But because it has all the other tracks in there, they kind of bog down the album a little bit, and so that's why I'm giving this album, Aim and Ignite by Fun, a 7 out of 10. And by the way, The Gambler in and of itself brought up the album a whole point. So that's all for the review today. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought of it and how you would rate the album yourself. On top of that, let me know if there's any albums or just singles released that you would like me to review in the future. And like I said, just let me know that down in the comments as well. That's all for now, and I hope I'll catch you all in the next one.